All right, so now it's time to add some CSS, some styling to our page. But how do we even work with CSS, and where does it go, and how does it connect? And let's just dive in from the beginning. The best place to write CSS is in its own file. So what we're gonna do is create our own CSS file. So to do that, let's go into our folder where our index.html lives, and let's create a new file. We'll call it styles.css. Awesome, we've created our CSS file, perfect. What we need to do now is to link it to our HTML file, because right now they're just kind of sitting beside each other, but they don't necessarily know that they're meant to work together. So what we need to do is go over to our index.html file. We're gonna go ahead and link our CSS file to our HTML. So we're gonna go into the head section, and we're going to use what is called a link element. So the link element does just that. It links one file to another. So we're gonna use link, and then the relationship, there are a couple of different attributes that the link element has. So one is rel, which stands for relationship. So it wants to know why these two sheets need to like work together. So we're gonna call this one, the relationship here is style sheet, because CSS, the CSS sheet we're working with is a style sheet. It's meant to style our HTML. And then we're gonna use another attribute called href. Href is basically the URL or the location of what the file is. In this case, because it's a local file, it's gonna be like right there, but you can even use like google.com for your href if that's what it needs to be. You wouldn't use it as your style sheet because Google is not a CSS file, but you get the idea. Hrefs can be used in a variety of situations for different types of links, and we'll use links a little bit later on. So for now, what we're gonna do is take our href, and we are going to we're going to link it to our style.css. Now remember how when we were talking about terminal and the // and all of that? Well, quite similarly, we can indicate a file is in the same folder as the one we're currently in by using /. So if I go // and you'll see that VS Code already recognizes what I'm trying to do, it will list all of the directories and the files that are in the current folder that I'm working in. So if I go // and I go to styles.css, that is actually the style sheet that we just created. So I hit enter, and it has already underlined it because it's basically created that link within within VS Code, telling me like, yeah, we've linked this CSS file. So all I have to do now is close out, again, a self-closing tag. You'll notice that most of the tags in the head are actually self-closing because there's nothing between them. They're just meant to hold pieces of information. And we'll go ahead and save that. And now we should have our style sheet linked to our HTML. But nothing happens yet, again, because we haven't put anything in our CSS. So let's go ahead and start styling this. There are a couple of ways that you can target HTML elements with CSS. And let's go ahead and move this over here so we can look at both at the same time. So you can target them by using what type of element they are, right? So you can target the body, you can target all the divs, H1s, Ps, strongs, inputs, forms, etc. That is one way of targeting. And if you have sort of a overarching change that you'd like to make, that's probably the best way to do it. So for instance, one thing that I'd like to change, because as you notice here, it is a sans serif font, and the font that we're using has serifs. It has those little like edges, those little hats. I want to make sure that the font that's used throughout this document is sans serif. So we're gonna select the body tag, so we're gonna select the body element, and we're going to do font family. So font family. So there are all of these different types of properties that you can access within CSS. Font family is just one of quite literally dozens and hundreds. So font family allows you to determine what type of font is it, generally speaking. You can sometimes specify the actual font. Sometimes that involves like downloading the font or linking it and all of that. But in this case, I just want a sans serif font. So I'm gonna scroll down here to where it says Arial, Helvetica, and sans serif, and click on that. So now, hopefully, everything in the body should be sans serif. And one really, really important thing to remember to do after you make a change to your files, as always, is save. So let's take a look over there. And look at that. All of our text is now sans serif. There are no more little hats and tails. It's perfectly clean and looking a little bit modern. Perfect. All right, so let's see what else we can do with this page. Now, here's the thing. I want to target the H1, And to be fair, I can do it just by, let's see. I want to target, actually, let's see. I want to target some of the text on the page, but not all of the text on the page. If you take a look at our image here, you'll see that a lot of the text is actually white. So this is white, that is white, try it free for 7 days is white, but this text at the bottom appears to be gray, and this text appears to be like pink or red or something. So we want to have a combination of different types and different colors of text. Now, as I mentioned, with coding, there's different ways to approach everything. Some ways are better than others, but it's really up to you and your personal preference. So the way I would like to approach this is to make the overall color white and then probably target the non-white elements. I think that's the cleanest way to do this. So another way I can do that is I target the body, and I use the property color, which is meant for font color, and I'll just name it white. Now, you might already have picked up what's going to happen. Our page looks like there's almost nothing on there, right? Right. So what we're going to do now is actually implement our background. So now it's kind of essential that we get the background going. We know from our files, so if we go into the files that are included with our project, that we have a background image, this background desktop. But it's not actually the pink image. It's just like the little icons that are on top. So we need to do some work with this background. All right, so let's go ahead and make our background image, and we're going to use, we're going to link it to our desktop BG intro desktop PNG. So the best way to do this is to use a URL. Just like you have google.com, just like you have Ahrefs, you're going to use a URL to link this selector to that background image file that's in our project. So we'll do URL brackets, and then in quotation marks, I'm going to specify the location of that BG intro desktop file, right? So if I look at where we are currently in styles.css. I need to go down a level to images and then into the BG intro desktop.png. So in order to get there, what I do is I type // indicating this folder. Then I want to go to the images folder, so I'll add images to that. And then I'll click on or type out the BG intro desktop.png, and that should link it right to that image. So if I click save and I navigate back over, great. We can start to see that our image is being applied. But there's one more thing. There's this like pink color that is not part of the background image. How do we even get that on there? Well, there's another property called background color. So I think this comes with a style guide, which is why they've given us all these files. So if we go over to styleguide.md and we go over to, let's see, there's a layout, there are colors, there's primates, a red, a green, an accent color, a blue, a font. All right, they've actually given us a specific font, so we can definitely use that if we'd like. I'm not quite sure which color it is, but you know what? We don't even have to guess. Let's take advantage of another tool that we have at our disposal. So there's this tool called the eyedropper. It's an extension that you can add onto your Google Chrome account, totally free, and you just click on it. Once you have it installed on your Google Chrome extensions, you click on it and you click where it says pick color from web page, and you can actually just hover over the part of your web page to get that color. So because we were unsure about what color this was, we've just grabbed that color, and we can see that there are 3 different ways it's described to us. So it's in a hash EC7476. So that's one way of describing it. It's also in an HSL, hue, saturation, and luma, as 359, 76%, and 69%. Or it's in an RGB, so it's a combination of red, green, and blue, and those are the numbers. So 236 red, 116 green, and 118 blue. We can use any of these. There's no right or wrong answer. For the purpose of this, I'll just use the hash because it's the shortest. So if I go back over, and I go back to our styles, I'll create a new property, and I'm just putting these in alphabetical order, but you can really do it in any order you want. I just find it easier to find when it's alphabetical. You can go background color, and I'll add the hash. I'll save. You'll see that VS Code actually populates it for me. It tells me which color it is. And there we go. Now we have our like pink background. We can see our white text, and we're like well on our way. Awesome. Great, we're in a good spot. In fact, we're in such a good spot that we might actually want to commit this to our GitHub repository, because say we do something else and we completely screw it up, we might end up wishing that we could come back to this spot. So let's go ahead and do just that. So we're working with a couple different pieces now. So let's go ahead and commit the background intro desktop, which is the image that we're using. Let's go ahead and click and commit our styles.css as well. And let's go and commit our index.html, which links these files together. Awesome. So let's give our message as initial styles. Initial, and let's try and spell correctly. There we go. And we're going to commit this. And now that we've made this commit, we're actually going to push it to our remote repository to make sure that, like, even if our computer just like vanishes in the next 5 minutes, it's still there. It's still there on the internet. And when we get a new computer, we can bring it back. So what we'll do is we'll tap these little 3 buttons right here, these little 3 dots up here, and we're going to click the word push. Because we've already connected the 2 repositories, it's going to know that when I say push, I mean push it to the remote that we've connected it to. So let's go ahead and click push. And you'll see the little blue bar goes. It's starting to go. It wasn't very many files, so it's not going to take a very long time. But if we go over to GitHub and we go back to our code for our sign-up form, we'll see that we just had recent pushes. So we have a styles.css file, which is our initial styling right here. And we have our images file, which has our images folder, which has 1 file, which is the desktop PNG. Awesome. Great place to be. We're flying through this. So the next thing we want to go and tackle, let's take a look at what we have here. The next thing we want to probably tackle is either this separation or putting these into different elements. We can go either way. Let's start by tackling these like little elements, and then we'll separate the 2 of them. And again, as I said, with coding, there are 8 different ways to do anything. It's totally up to you and what you prefer to do first. And of course, you can always change your mind and do something different if you've decided that, you know, you've chosen the wrong approach. It's totally fine. Especially as you're learning, feel free to make mistakes and then just Control-Z and do something new. So let's start by taking this, try it free for 7 days and $20 a month after. Let's go ahead and try and create this, this box. So let me go back to our style guide and see if there's anything there. I think this might be that like dark blue or maybe the grayish blue. I'm not quite sure. Let's take a stab at it and see what we can do. So in order to target this line right here, this P tag, right? There are a couple of ways we can do it. We can either add padding to the P tag, or we can wrap it in a divider and add the styling to the divider. Totally up to you what you want to do. Just, you know, make your choice and stick with it. So let's talk about padding. What padding is that little space, between the text and the outside boundary of the box. That is padding. So actually, I've just answered my own question. We have to use a div if we want to use padding. Margin, however, is the thing on the outside of something, right? So the margin is the distance between two objects. So for instance, because we want to use a background color, we need to have it as the background for an element. So let me show you what I mean. If I had the background color for this P tag and I made it that like bluish grayish color, so let's try something here. Let's take all the P tags and we'll do background color, and then we'll select, let's try this grayish blue, not sure, and we'll do that and we'll save it. All the P tags have that color, but as you see, there's not a lot of room around the P tags either, right? They're kind of all just like really long, straight lines. What we can do to avoid this is to actually create a box around the P tag and use some padding within that box to specify how much space we want for that element. So let me show you what I mean. Let's get rid of this P tag background color, and let's create a box around our P tag, right? So we're going to create this like larger box around our little line of text here. So let's create another div, and let's wrap that around our P tag. Awesome. All right, so now we want to target that specific P tag too, because as you noticed, when I put that color on the P tag, it did like all of the P tags, right? That's not what we want. And we want that specific div surrounding that specific P tag. Now there are a couple of ways to do this. We can actually like try and do like a nested kind of thing where we might write something like, body, and then the child of the body is a div, and then I think it's within another div, and then we have a p tag, and that is the p tag we're looking to target. But one, we're not looking to target the p tag, we're looking to target the div, and two, this is still not specific enough. Like, sure, this will target this one specific div, and it will work. So if I do background color, and I don't think that was the right blue. Let's do a different blue this time. Let's do the dark blue. Might just be regular blue, but we'll see. We'll do this. That will target that specific div. But the only reason it targets that is because there is only one div. Let's take another look at what I did here. So I targeted the body. And then I targeted the divs within the body, which is this div and this div. Then I targeted the divs within the divs, and there's only, in this case, one div within a div. I know it gets a little bit complicated, but in this case, there's only one div within a div, and that is this div. So that's not the best way of going about this, because even me trying to explain it to you was confusing. What we'd rather do is just target this specific divider, this specific element, and not any other element. So there are two ways we can do this. If the design we're looking to implement will be reused somewhere else, we can use something called a class. So a class is a type of property that gets put on any visible HTML element. So you can type in class, and then you can name a class anything you want. Any text that you want to give it, you can name it that. So if I call this class, call like CTA, like call to action, then that will be the name of the class to target. And if I have any other calls to action on the website, maybe I want them to all look the same. And so then when I go here, I can actually just change this structure, and I can target the CTA. Now, to target a class, you actually need to put a dot before whatever the text is. So the dot specifies classes. When I type in CTA and I put the background color as this, and I identify this as this having the class CTA, and this is the only thing with the class CTA, it should only, once again, target this specific thing. Great, it did it again. Perfect. Now, what if we wanted to target only a singular instance of something, right? Like we didn't want to target any other type of CTA. This is literally just for this one and only CTA. Well, what we can do then is use this other identifier called an ID, a piece of like identification, essentially. It's another attribute that you can use on visible HTML or non-visible HTML elements, and you literally just type in ID. And just like class, you can give it whatever name you want. So you can type, for this one, I might type in unique CTA and save that. And then when I go here to specify it, I'm actually going to use a hash, because a hash is the selector for IDs in CSS. So I'll just type in the name of it, unique CTA, and I'll do my little brackets, and then maybe I'll change the background color. This time I'll put it as blue. But like we've already said it, so like it shouldn't change, right? Wrong. It definitely changed. Now, why did that happen? Well, the thing about CSS is that it has a hierarchy. So there are two ways to determine this hierarchy and the specificity that is called upon by CSS. At the at the sort of level of least importance is the element. So those are our like body tags. When we type H1, H2, they're generally just referring to the type of element in general, right? Those are like non-specific elements. Following that is classes. If I specify that all the H1s should have the color red as the text, but then I give one of my H1s a class, H1 class, whatever I put as the color in that H1 class will actually override what I put for that H1 element. So, that H1 will then be blue instead of red. Does that make sense? All right. Now, being even more specific, as you just saw, are IDs. IDs are meant to be unique identifiers for only one element. You shouldn't reuse them for more than one element. It's really just meant for that one individual element. And so if I wanted to be really, really specific and I said just that H1, just that one div, I would then use an ID and say H1 ID and then change the color to yellow, right? And so if I went and I took my H1 and I added all of these classes. So I added class equals H1 class and ID equals H1 ID. I spell it correctly, very important. Which one do you think would come out on top? Hopefully you guessed H1 ID. And if you did, you guessed right because it's yellow. So it's meant to go through specificity. But say I didn't have this H1 ID, right? Say I just had class. It should be blue, right? And it is. But there's one other thing to be aware of. CSS is also works in terms of what it sees, in which order it sees it. The last thing CSS sees is the thing that it will take. So if you've written H1 class and you've colored it blue here, and you've colored it green here, and then you've like gone under the green, you said, actually, no, I'm gonna color it purple. If you have your linter on for this, it will actually probably trigger an error. But say you don't, and you save that, it should choose the last version of that class that you specify. So if you guess, it should be purple. And when you check, it is purple. So what we need to take away from this lesson is two things. One, that CSS uses classes. So you can specify classes and apply them to multiple elements. So I can actually apply, even though they're not H1s, I can apply this to this p tag and, save that. And then I should have, well, it's a bit hard to tell, but this is purple as well. So I can apply it to multiple different elements. Classes are meant to share within a certain amount of elements. You can target the element itself, the type of the element, but just know that it will transfer across all of those types of those elements. Really only recommended to do for like the body, or if you know that all p tags should be a certain size or something like that. And then we have IDs, right? IDs are meant to actually target something very specific. They're only meant to be singular. You should only ever use one ID for one element, and you should not repeat them. That's what classes are for. Awesome. So let's go ahead and style the rest of this page. So let's go ahead and add the padding that we were talking about before to our element. So it seems like there's a good amount of like padding on the left and padding on the right, and a little bit of padding at the top and a little bit of padding at the bottom. As we mentioned, padding is the stuff that's inside an element. It's basically making the element itself bigger, right? Think about it as like natural padding. You're like putting on extra layers to pad yourself up against the cold. So let's add in some padding. So the way you write padding, there are two ways to write padding. You can actually write padding and then specify the direction. So padding left, and then you can specify it in pixels. So let's say it's like 20 pixels. And that will add some padding to the left there, just a little bit of padding right there. There's another way, and then you do that for padding left, right, top, and bottom. Those are the four sides of any element in CSS. Left, right, top, and bottom. That's one way to target things using padding. You can also type in padding just the word by itself and use two selectors. So you can select the top and the bottom as well as the left and the right. It's a bit of a shortcut in order to be able to write padding in just one line. So we could write the top and the bottom padding, because also if we look at our design, it looks like they should be pretty similar, right? The left and the right look similar and the top and the bottom look similar. So we could put our left and right as, let's say, 40 pixels. Or sorry, the top and the bottom should probably be about 20 pixels. And the left and the right, maybe 40 or 60 pixels. Let's take a look. And like, it's roughly kind of what we're looking for. Maybe not exactly what we're looking for, but roughly. The problem here, though, is that our elements are stretching all the way across the page, which is not what we want to do at all. We want to make sure that they're just like nice and cute and like wrapped up how they have them here in the image, right? So in order to do that, we're going to have to employ some sort of like larger container, something to like make all of this basically fit into these, like, they're like two columns. We need to like get them to stay within two columns. And then also like fix up this padding and like, make it look a little bit more pretty. So let's take a couple of steps towards doing that. First things first, let's separate these into two columns because I think that's going to make our styling a little bit easier. So the way that I'm going to choose to do this, and again, 100 different ways to do 100 different things, but the way that I'm going to choose to do this is with flexbox. Flexbox is one of the greatest tools in CSS, and I really recommend that you take some time and learn it because you're going to be using it every single day, I guarantee you. Flexbox is a flexible box layout that essentially creates a type of container that holds various elements. And depending on what properties you give to that flexbox, it will basically shift in size based on the size of the window and the screen it is. It's really great to use for responsive design and responsive layouts, and it's a bit of a game changer. So let's use Flexbox and let's employ some of these tools to get our page to look how we want it to look. And I'll have this link to CSS tricks in the description below so you can take a look for yourself. Looking at the design, we know that these two pieces of text are meant to be together, and this whole section is kind of meant to be together, these two columns that we're looking at. And then larger than that, there seems to be this like side padding or whatever on the body, or maybe a margin, haven't decided yet. So let's go ahead and give some identifiers to these two divs and then go from there. So what we can do here is, in fact, you know what we'll do? We'll wrap everything in one big div and we'll put all the styles on that. So this is a div, and you can see sort of where things capture things. So there's the body, which is like sort of the page element. I'm not gonna mess around with that. Let's use a div that wraps around all of the elements within it. And we're gonna give this let's give it the class name of container in case I wanna use it again on a different page or something. And let's now give that container let's select that container. Select that container. And let's give it the display of flex. So when you type in display flex, that actually creates a flexbox container. So if we've done it right, you'll see here our two pieces of information are now next to one another. Now they're already separated because if you remember earlier, we went ahead and created these two divs. So Flexbox has kind of done a lot of the work for us already, which is awesome. So let's take a look at what else we need to do. We need to make sure that we have like some sort of space, some padding here. It looks pretty even all the way around. So let's go ahead and add that in. So let's go, let's do some padding. And we're gonna do all four sides. Now, another trick to padding is when you do all four sides, you can, and it's the same amount, you can just put in one number. So if you put like 50 pixels, it should do 50 pixels on all four sides. So pixels or rem or em are basically two different ways of describing size. Personally, I prefer to use rem or em just because it's a bit more customizable. So if you have, if your particular browser is set to font size 16 pixels, then all of the sizes of all of the font that follows will be based off of that root size. So I prefer to use rem just because it's a little bit more adaptable, because if somebody changes their pixel size to like 24 to be able to see things better, it will adjust and it won't maintain this like very small size that's hard to see. So I'm actually going to go ahead. Oh, and also most browsers, the default font size is 16 pixels. So basically everything in rem that follows that is a multiplication of that. So 1 rem is 16 pixels. 2 rem is 32 pixels. 3 rem is 3 rem is 48 pixels, etc., etc., etc. And so once you get used to it a bit more, you'll get the hang of it. So what I'm going to do here is actually change this to 3 rem, and I'm going to go ahead and change the padding on my CTA here to rem as well, just to make my life a little bit easier. And these are approximate values. I'm sort of playing around with the stylings as well. So if I go back here, starting to see, starting to form around the edges there. Let's make the padding a little bit greater. And the great thing about rem too, you just like bump it up a couple of numbers and it's like a ton more padding like that. There's a ton more padding on the side there. I think it might be even as high as 10. All right, let's leave it at that for now. That seems like a good amount of padding. Awesome. So we have the padding around our elements, and now we have our two elements side by side. Let's take a look at our design again. All right, so another thing to notice here is that our text here is centered, and I'm guessing this is centered as well because it's like sort of centered on centered, right? That's an important thing to pay attention to when you're looking to implement a design, where things are centered, if they're like leaning to the left, leaning to the right, etc. The really awesome thing about Flexbox and about using Google Chrome in general is that you can actually play around with these styles in the browser itself. So you don't have to like code up a whole bunch of stuff and then wonder if it works. You can really just actually play around with this here and see if it works. All right, so what I'm gonna start to do first is actually centering these elements within this container. So you'll see our container here, and if you actually scroll down under the styles piece right here, you can actually see the padding. So we have 10 rems of padding around all sides, and that is 160 pixels of padding around all sides. That's that green margin right there. Pretty cool, huh? So the middle here, that is the size of our actual elements themselves. So a couple issues here. The form is not really built out, so that's why it's looking so shrunk. Maybe the text is a little bit small as well. So let's go ahead and sort of flesh out these components and then see how much more padding we need to add, padding and margins that we need to add to our elements. So let's start over here on the right because it's the most complex one. And let's see what we can do. Let's finish up what we were doing here with this try it free CTA. So if we take a good look at it, we'll notice actually that the edges are rounded and they seem to have some sort of shadow underneath them too, because that's like part of this. And if we look at it now, there is no shadow, there is no rounding. And also there's a significant gap between this and the form itself. So what we want to do here is do a couple of things. We want to round these edges, and actually it appears these edges are similarly round and have a similar border. So we might actually just create a class for this. We'll round the edges and then we will add the little shadow border there. All right, so let's create a class called round edges. .round edges. And let's go over, so which div was it? It was the CTA. So another thing is you can add multiple classes to each element. So we'll add the second class here of round edges. And then we'll add the other class here to our form of class round edges. But actually, you know what? I've changed my mind. I realized that we should actually wrap this form in a div because this p tag here is part of this larger thing, but it's not actually part of the like formally this defined form. So let's cancel this and let's create another div here. Div. And then let's wrap that around our p tag here. And then let's add this class here. Class equals round edges. Awesome. Cool. So now that we've created this class, let's make it do something. So there is a CSS property called border radius. And yes, I do have a lot of these memorized, but it's only after working with them over and over and over again. You can literally just look up CSS properties for a border or CSS properties to do this, and you'll get an exhaustive list of all the properties you could possibly target. There might even be better ways to do what I'm doing here with just plain CSS and HTML, but it's what I'm working with at the moment. So round edges, we're gonna target the border. But it's actually the radius of the border. So border radius. And we are going to make it, let's say, let's curve it maybe 20%. Let's see if that works. No, that looks super weird. Let's curve it using rem instead. Let's use 2 rem. That looks a bit more normal. All right, cool. Let's compare it to our design. Maybe it's a little bit too sharp actually. Let's do 1 rem. That seems a little bit closer. That's a little bit closer. All right. And now we can already tell that our, actually I'll move this over here since we're not. We can already tell that there's like way too much padding here, right? So let's take a look at where we can remove some padding. We can definitely remove some up and down padding, top and bottom padding, and some left and right padding. So let's go ahead and remove, which one was it? It was the CTA. So top and bottom padding, let's change that to 1. That is already looking a whole lot better. And actually, the thing here is this is centered. So we want to actually do a text align center on the CTA, and then we'll revise our padding. So let's add the property text align center, which will actually align our text to the center of our page. There we go. That's perfect. And let's compare it again to our image here. Not too bad. Not too bad. I think it might actually be the element itself is a bit too wide. So let's tackle that in the next bit. what we want to do first, though, is add some more, adding that shadow, that little border radius shadow there. Let's go ahead and see if we can add that. And actually, let me modify this a little bit more. 1.5 rem, I think. That's probably best. Yeah, that looks a little bit more natural. Maybe this should be 2 rem. No, that's not going to change until we change it. All right, so 1.5 rem. And then let's add that border shadow. So it's a shadow on the bottom of the element here, right? So I believe it's called box shadow, if I'm not mistaken. Box shadow. And the great thing is here, you can see the like instructions for how to use this, right? So attaches one or more drop shadows to the box. The property is comma separated list of shadows, each specified by 2 to 4 length values, an optional color, and an optional inset keyword. Emitted lengths are 0 to colors. Okay. So let me pull up the MDM reference because that is still a little bit cryptic for me. Let's copy that and let's paste it in this tab right here. Okay, so the great thing about MDN is you can actually see like tangible examples of the thing. So what we want to do here is play around with these box shadows to sort of get what we're looking for. All right, so I think this is kind of close in terms of like the sharpness of the edges, but the placement's a little bit off. So let's read a little bit further. So box shadow, this is the syntax that we'll be employing. So box shadow, so the first number is the offset x, so it's sending it like left or right on the x-axis. The second number is the offset y on the y-axis, and then the third one is the color. Okay, that makes sense. And you can add more. You can add a blur radius, a spread radius. We don't need all of that. I think we just need the offset y and the color. So I think we probably have to put box shadow and put a 0 for the first one because we don't want it to go left and right. In our design, it's literally just right underneath our element. And then we'll do the offset y of 0.25 rem. We'll see what that looks like. And then we'll do the color of like gray. We'll try gray for now. And then let's take another look. And you can kind of see it, but it's not really there. Let me add a margin to the bottom of our element so we can kind of see it a little bit better. And just for reference, the margin is the space between two elements. Now, when two elements are next to each other, the margin actually gets merged and combined, and it's just the combination of those two margins. So let's go add a margin of 1 rem, and great. Now we have a little bit more room to see what's going on. Let's even make it a little bit further. Let's do 2 rem. Let's see what's going on with our box shadow there. All right, so it's giving us a little kind of weird shadow, but maybe it's the color that's off. Maybe it's just not spread out enough. Let's change this. Let's give it a whole 1 rem, and yeah, that's a little bit closer to what our design is. It's like, it's not quite that far out, but it's there. So let's do maybe 0.5 rem. And then the thing is, the color doesn't seem right. Like, it seems like it's some sort of like gray, like shadowy situation. So we might actually, let me take a look, see if there is, no, I don't see a good representation here. I think what they actually have done here is used like an RGB or an HSL color, or an RGBA. So I think that might be the best way we can do this. So so this is the RGB of gray. So it's 128, 128, 128. I just did that by clicking on the color and then clicking on the top here. And then I'm going to make it an RGBA, which will give the opacity as well. And I'm going to change that to 50. Or maybe, I think it's 0.05. And let's see if that changes what that color looks like. Awesome. Yeah, it's looking a little bit more like that shadow there. I think maybe it's actually black that the color is. I think it might actually be black, and then it's just at half opacity or maybe a quarter opacity. Yeah, that looks a little bit close. Let's try it quarter. Awesome. I think that's pretty much what we're looking for. Maybe even a little bit lighter than that, maybe 10%. Perfect. I think we nailed it. I think that's what we're looking for. Yeah, I think that's it. We actually want to add this box shadow. I've made a mistake here. We want to add to round edges to make sure that both the CTA as well as the larger form element have that. So let's move that down there. Let's hit save. We can take out this little space right here. And let's take a look again. Awesome. But this is looking super weird because we don't actually have any background. So let's go ahead and add that. So I'm guessing this is probably just proper white. So let's go ahead and create that. Let's go ahead and fill in that like larger div there. So let's give this another class, and we'll call it form. So this is the class of form, not the element of form. And we'll target it with form, and we'll go background, color, and we'll do just regular old white. There are a lot of named colors, but as you can see, if you don't get the exact name you're looking for, if you want to kind of play around with the color a little bit more, you can use HSL, RGB, RGBA, or hex. Okay, great. So we have all of those together, but they're meant to be stacked one on top of the other, but right now they're all like jammed up against one another. So let's try and fix that. Let us target. So another way that you can target elements is within a class. So once you've targeted a specific class, you can then target specific types of elements within that. So let's target all the inputs that are children of forms. And let's give them all padding of 1 rem and see what that gives us. All right, that gave us nothing. You know what? I think it's maybe because I haven't targeted correctly. It has to be form, input. And so really, we don't even need that first form. We can just do form input. So all the inputs that are children of the form have padding. Awesome. But then they appear to be like quite wide. They appear to be, like a certain width. And I'm not quite sure what that width is, but I do know that they're stacked one on top of the other. So again, a couple different ways to do this, but I think the best way to do it would be to take this form and to transform it into flexbox. So let's change this display to flex and save it. And that's what we want it to look like. All right, so it's getting there. They're now all in one line. It's just going the wrong way. Well, with flexbox, there's actually something called changing the direction of the flexbox. So you can it's called flex direction. So you can say flex direction, and its standard value is row. So everything's like by standard is row. So when you saw we put in that container and it took those two columns and it made them side by side, that's the standard way. You can change it though to be column instead of row. So if I type in flex direction column and I click save, great, now we're a lot closer to what we want it to look like. They're now going one on top of the other. This is perfect. Great. All right, we're at a really good place with our styling now. Let's go ahead and keep going. So we need to give these boxes a margin, and also, I don't know if we've done it. No, yeah, we need to make the edges a little bit more round, and a slightly grayer color as well, just to follow the design. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we take a look here, we see, okay, yeah, so there is not enough room between those inputs. So let's put some, just how we have our input here, we have the padding. We can do something called margin bottom. So as we talked about before, the margin is the outside of an element, right? So you have your element, and the margin is basically the space around it. And you're basically saying, hey, keep this away from other elements, this much space, this many pixels, or you can specify it in rem. So let's use the margin bottom in order to specify how much space on the bottom of each input there should be left for there to be a little bit more room. So if we do margin bottom, and let's try 1 rem to start with, we should see, let me give this a good refresh. Yep, there we go. All right, so we have a little bit more space there at the bottom, and that's looking pretty good for now. The next thing we want to do, this seems to be the same border radius, so I think this is actually a style that we just want to add to the element there. Round edges. So let me take out this box shadow and actually put that in its own class. We'll call that container shadow. And we'll just keep round edges, literally just round edges, which makes sense. So everywhere we had round edges, because I've made that change, we just need to add in container shadow. And round edges here, we just add in container shadow. So as I mentioned, you can add as many styles as you want to your HTML elements. Just make sure that you know which styles you're adding and what they do. It's really good to have descriptive style names just so that you don't need to really think about what each of them do. You say, oh, like round edges, it makes the edges round. And we are going to add that to all of the inputs. So we're going to add a class to the inputs. And a really cool thing you can do in VS Code, at least on Mac, it is Command D. It might be Control D on a PC. But when you highlight something that is like the same, so for instance, I have 5 inputs here. If I press Command D, and I just press it, each time I press it, it will actually highlight the next thing that is exactly the same. It'll highlight the next word that is input. So if I press it 5 times, it has just highlighted all 5 inputs. Why this is really cool is because I can then just press the right arrow and type something into all 5 of them so I don't need to go back and like write, oh, class is this, class is that, class is this. I can just literally type it once. I can go class equals round corners and click save, and now all 5 inputs have now gotten rounded corners. One thing that you might notice is that the border here is only this black color. It's only this color when it's been selected, when it's been hovered over or focused on. And that's actually what we call a pseudo selector. So pseudo selectors in CSS are like fake selectors. Basically, they only occur when you do an action or there's a particular thing done to a component or to an element. So in this case, where it's highlighting, where we've the user in this case has like selected and put in that their name is Jonathan, they are now focused on that input and is now saying to them like, this is the input that is in focus. And it tells them this by a style. So a lot of these styles are not just for like, to make it look more pretty. It's actually an accessibility thing. It lets you know which input you're actually using at the moment. So in order to get this style to work, as you'll notice here, there's maybe like a thinner gray or a lighter gray down here. I'm guessing it might, no, it's not in here. Well, it's some kind of lighter gray option here. So let's try and see if we can make this work. So what we have to do in order to make it work is change the border of all of the inputs. So let's go ahead and type in border 1 pixel solid light gray. Awesome, perfect. That's what I was looking for. Cool. It's giving it a bit more of a round look. I think it actually might be a little too round, to be honest. So let's go ahead and get rid of that and just add that to the input. So we're going to make it border radius, maybe 0.5 rem, maybe 50% of what it is. That looks a little bit more like what our design has. Awesome. I'm pretty happy with that. Now what we want to do is, as I said, add that pseudo selector that when the input is in focus, when this particular one is in focus, we can actually have it put in that specific information. So we're going to do form input, and then to access a pseudo selector, you're going to use the colon, and you're going to put focus. Oops, focus. And so once it's in focus, we want the border to be 1 pixel, same 1 pixel, solid black. And we might change this to 2 pixels, so that's why I've chosen to use this selector. So now as you see, whenever I select on one, it'll actually just give me exactly what I'm looking for. Oh, you know what? Another thing is, if you take a good look, you'll notice that the font is actually bolded. Let's just quickly make that change. So let's do, this is called font weight, and let's put it at 700, which is closer to the bold side. Awesome, a little bit more bold there. All right, so now let's work on this button here. So this button is another piece of input, but it's the button type of input, so it's just a little bit different. So what we want to do here is actually, we have this little shadow here, which I just noticed, and then it says claim your free trial. So we've already added the words in claim your free trial, but we want to make the color correct, and then we want to add that little shadow in there. So let's see, there are a couple different ways we could do this. We could use an ID, but there's actually this really interesting CSS way of selecting an element called the last child of. So if you think of every element as a parent, any element that falls within that parent, so for instance, we have a divider here, if the divider is a parent, anything that falls right directly underneath it is a child, just like in real life with people. So you'd have the parent and the child. And then following this, family tree sort of speech, the input here would be the divider's grandchild. So, pretty easy to follow, but just remembering that whatever the top level one is the parent, then the child, and the grandchild. And it applies because parents have parents themselves. So they would be the children of their parents and so on and so forth, just like in real life. But I bring up all of that to say that we can actually target this input here as the last child. So they're in order of, I guess, their birth or how we've typed them in. So we can do form input and then use the last child selector. So it will basically select only that input, only that button input as it is currently the last child. If you ever change orders, this will kind of mess it up. but we can use it for now because we know we're just coding this website one time. So I believe this is the correct green for that button, because I think that's the only green on the web page. So we're going to have the background color is going to be this green. Looks about right. Awesome. Cool. It's the right green. You'll notice that the text is actually sort of leaning towards the left there. What we're going to do here is actually just make it a text align of center. And just like when you're using like Microsoft Word or something like that, how you can align your text, it's the same kind of concept. So now the text is right in the center. Final thing we want to do is add that really interesting container shadow. So we are going to go into just the last input and add a class of container shadow. And great. I think we're about good with that. We don't need to spend too much time on this design, but at least now we know, we have our little box shadow. This is looking pretty similar. I think one more thing that we might want to tackle as we're here is this last line. So the terms and services line that they have here. So this is going to be the one thing that's gray. And so because it's the only thing, we'll just use a specific selector to get to that, that p tag. So this p tag is, let's call it, we'll give it a class of terms. And we'll create another class here, call it terms. And we will change the color of that. I believe, let's try light gray again and see if that works for us. Light gray. Great. The other thing you'll notice about this is that the text is really small. So the font size, although we might not know specifically, we could guess maybe it's like 0.75 rem. Again, we want to text align it to the center, so it'll align it to the center of the container that it's in. The final thing that we want to do right here is, you see how terms and services is actually a different color? We can do that by creating a span or using the strong. So because we've already made it bold, we can actually just use the strong. We can select terms and then the strong that's within terms. And we can change the color of that, might be the red here, and change it to, yeah, let's see if that's the right color. We'll change the font color to this red here. And yeah, that seems about right. So cool. Now we have, by clicking the button, you agree to our terms and services. We have that pretty well styled. Let's tackle this other side before we sort of do our final pass of all the styles on the page. So on the side of the page here, we have this big H1, learn to code by watching others, and then there's this P tag underneath. Right now, it's kind of just like one line and one like little line. Let's make a couple of modifications to make that work better for us. Let's take advantage of this opportunity to actually refactor this into a grid. So grids in CSS are basically a way of creating complex web designs using basically a template. So you'll have your width and your height and a series of columns and rows and gaps between them. And that's basically how you create a grid. There is a website called CSS Tricks that has a complete guide to grid. I'd highly recommend, I mean, you don't have to go ahead and get the poster, but like having this terminology near to you when you're working with grid for the first time, I think it'll really help you figure out what's going on and reference those different points. So we can actually we can refactor our container. Instead of display flex, we can change it to display grid. Grid. And great, now you'll see it's like going vertically. What we can do to change that is, right, so we can use this, this property called grid template columns, and we'll actually set it up so that there are 2 columns, each of equal size. So we'll add that here. We'll go grid template columns, and they use fractions, so we'll use 1 FR and 1 FR. We could also use 50% and 50%, and either way, let's actually use 50% and 50% just to be equal. And that'll take up half the page, or half the space of the container will be allocated to both of them. So then we have our grid, right? They're now equally spaced, and it's working quite well. The next thing we want to do actually is add something called a grid gap. So we want to have a certain amount of space right in the middle there between the 2 of them. And if you just search on the page for gap, I'm sure it'll pop up. So grid column gap, because we want a column gap, not a row gap. So we'll just add in column gap and then the line size. So we can do a 10 pixel, 20 pixel, 30, etc. So let's try a column gap. Column gap of, let's say, 3 rem to start. Not too bad. Let's see what it's looking like here. I thought that might be all right, to be honest. Yeah, that seems like it's good. Cool. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to take this text, this text box here, and we want to actually center everything within it. So we're going to actually create a class here, and we're going to call it page text. Naming things is one of the hardest parts of development. All right, so we might change that later, but let's go ahead and call it page text for now. So we'll use that name here, and we will turn that, we're gonna actually turn that into a flexbox. So back to what we had before with the others, and we are going to now, you'll see it'll actually put things side by side once again. We are actually going to change that so it is flex direction. As you remember, we did flex direction column. That's what we did for our form. And then we are going to align items. So there are two terms that you can use with flexbox in order to place your items in a specific place. So you can use align items or justify content. Justify content typically happens along the x-axis. That means that you can either justify the content so that it is centered. You can justify your content so that it's spaced between. You can justify your content so that they're spaced evenly. And these are just all the items are spaced evenly or centered, or they have some space between them. On the y-axis, you can use align items. So justify content is for the x-axis, align items is for the y-axis. On the y-axis, you'd use align items, and in this case, you'd have a similar set of options, center, but instead of space between, you can use flex start, so the start of the box, or flex end, the end of the box. And I believe those options are also available on justify content. So yeah, we're going to use justify content to center our text. And there we go. Now it's centered in the middle of the page. Awesome. So yeah, we have our flex box, we have our grid, we have our two items here. Things are looking great. What else do we need to change? All right, so it looks like there is a little bit of, is it space? Maybe it's a little bit more space in the gap here. So let me add a little bit more space in that column gap. Let's do maybe 6 round. Let's double it. Awesome. All right, so we have a little more space in the gap there. But even when I have the page wide open like this, it looks as if there's not, it looks as if the padding on the page itself is uneven. Okay, that's a little tricky thing about this container. All right, so what we're going to actually do is change this to 45% and to 45%, and then we should be able to modify this so that we have a gap. We will then justify the items stretch. No, justify content. All right, great. We'll just justify our content by space between. So justify content and aligned items are properties you can use on grid or on flexbox. I believe flexbox is actually built off of grid. It just depends on what works best for your scenario. All right, so now that we have our boxes set up, seems like it's looking pretty good so far. What we want to do is just make sure that our styling is all right. So I think one thing that might be missing here is just maybe there's a little bit more left and right padding than I initially thought. So let's add a little bit more padding to the left and right of the container. So as we talked about, when you have padding, you can either use one property here, and it'll be, top, bottom, left, and right, or you can use 2, and it'll be top and bottom and left and right. So I'm going to actually add this, the left and right. I'm going to change it to 15 rem and see what that gives us. All right, great. Already it's looking a lot closer to what I want it to look like. Let's go one more time, and let's maybe say 20 rem. And there, perfect. Now the page is breaking at the right point. I think we're on the right track. The next thing we want to do here is update the text in this p tag. It's a little bit too small, and there's actually not enough line height between the lines. So let's see if we can select that specifically. So this is the page text. This is the p tag under the page text. And we are going to change the font size, to, let's try 2 rem. which is 32 pixels. That's a little bit too big, so let's do 1.5 rem. Maybe 1.25 rem. It's a little bit bigger. All right, that should be better. And then we're going to change the line height to 1.5. Yeah, that seems pretty close. All right, awesome. So learn to code by watching others, see how experienced developers solve problems in real time. Cool. I think we're getting a lot closer to what we want. One thing that's really not working for us, though, is the fact that we don't have the right font. If you notice, the font here is not the font we're working with there. They're pretty similar, but they're not exactly the same. So let's go to our style guide here and see if we can include this Poppins font. Let me copy this link here. And we'll go over and open it in a new tab. Whoops, there we go. All right, cool. So to add this font, or to add any Google font to your project, what you want to do is you can actually use a line of code to add it. So let's go ahead and add all the ones we think we're going to use, probably everything from regular up. We don't have any italicized text, so probably just the regular versions of the text and the bold versions of the text. Bold, maybe extra bold, we might use that. And black, we might use that. And we'll take one under regular, we'll take light. All right, so now that we've selected all of our fonts in Google Fonts, we've navigated through to Google Fonts and decided that we're going to use Poppins. We're going to take this tag here and we're going to add it to our HTML. So yeah, let's add Poppins to our font family, and it's Poppins sans serif. So the reason that we give the name of the font family and then sans serif or serif is because Poppins is the font that we would like the computer to use if it's available. The backup is to use a different sans serif font if Poppins is not available on the computer. Maybe the person is using an older computer, or maybe they don't have an internet connection, they've loaded the page and then they can't, they've saved it to download offline. I'm not quite sure, but it's good to have a default, a backup, in case the really specific one you asked for is not available. So now that we go back to our page, we'll see that our new font has been added and we can really see how close it's looking to our design. All right, awesome. One other thing that I've noticed on this left side is that the margin on the bottom is not as big. I'm guessing it's the margin from the header, but we can just check this by right-clicking what we want to check out, and then we can see that little orange on the top and the bottom, that's actually the margin. So we can see that the margin is pretty substantial on the header. The P tag also has a margin. So we can do one of two things. First things first, I'm going to get rid of the margin on the top of the P tag. So I'm going to go margin top on the P tag, and I'm going to make it 0 so that there is no margin. So if you take a look at our code now, you'll see there's only a margin on the bottom of the P tag. If I X this out, let's see how it looks now as compared to before. That's pretty close. That's pretty close to where we want to be. I could even change the margin on the bottom here. I can go margin bottom and change that to maybe, I believe it was 37 pixels. So let's maybe do 1 rem instead of 2. That may be a little too close, maybe 1.5, just to make it a little bit closer than what it was, but not too close. All right, maybe 1.75. Yeah, I think that's good for now. So great, we have our learn to code by watching others. One more thing that I've noticed that's, kind of bothering me, I'm not sure if it's bothering you, but we don't have the exact width of the container here, right? We've added padding and stuff like that, but it's not perfect. One thing that I think would probably be the better route to go is to do it just what we did with the container. Let's change this to grid from flexbox. So this container that's encapsulating the try free for 7 days is the, which container is that? That's this container here. All right. So actually, does this container even have, oh, this doesn't even have styling. All right, so let's give this a class of form container. So we have the form and then we have the form container. That makes sense. So form container, I try and kind of put them in the order that they are in the HTML as well. It's not exactly perfect, but there are other ways to make our styling a little bit more pretty as we go on. So form container, we want to make this a display of grid. So let's save that. Let's take a look at what that's done. So if we inspect it here, we'll see that we have our grid, our form container, and we have our 2 pieces here. what this has done is kind of given us defined boundaries. However, it appears that this has a margin to it. So this is CTA rounded corner. You can actually dive in here and see what that margin is being caused by. And okay, it's from CTA. We've given it a margin of 2 rep. So we're actually probably the cause of our problem here. So let's go back to margin and we'll do margin bottom and change that to 2 rep. And there we go. Now we have tried free for 2 days. We have learned to code by watching others. We have everything lined up perfectly just how we'd like it. All right, so now that we've added in all the styles and we're pretty much in a good place, we should go ahead and commit all of our work. So let's go ahead and commit the files that we've actually worked on. So this index.html file, we'll add that. We're not using this README template, so we can probably go ahead and get rid of that. Yeah, you can actually just delete files right in the git commit section. This README we're not using either, so we can get rid of that. The style guide, we've used it a couple times. We can keep that for now. Our styles.css file, we definitely want to add that because we've added a whole bunch of styles since we last made our commits. ActiveStates.jpg, we'll probably still use that. Desktop preview, desktop design, we have that. I don't know if we'll need desktop preview. I think that's just another marketing piece. This is the other HTML file. We don't actually need that because we built our own, so we can get rid of that. Mobile design. We're not going to do mobile designs for this one, so we can go ahead and delete that, but we can definitely work on mobile designs in the future. Get rid of that as well. The favicon we won't be using in this, and the icon error we might still use that. So let's go ahead and commit the changes to the files that we've actually worked on, so the HTML and the CSS, and we can say add styles. And we'll select commit, and then we'll go ahead and push all of our commits to our main branch. And then if we go to github.com/our name, and we go to repositories, we can see that sign up form has just had another commit just now. We've added the styles, so we're good to go. We're in a good place. If we click into styles, we'll see that all of our styles have been updated here. This was our quick lesson on how to work with CSS and to build your own quick website and develop it using HTML and CSS from scratch. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you took something from it. See you in the next one.